Hi, everyone. This is Dee Marley at the History Bards podcast. We have the great privilege of welcoming Stephen Eoannou. I wanted to make sure I said that right. Eoannou, which he told me that is of Greek origin. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that later. But
Sure.
we are so glad to have you on the show today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And for many of you might have remembered last year we were able to review some of Stephen's books for the HFC Book of the Year contest. So we'll definitely put those links back on so people can go back and check out those books. And so let's kind of get a little bit more into the interview. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your writing journey and how you were led to write about the books that you did?
Well, it's been a long journey.
Yeah.
I started, writing seriously in college. I think I took my first creative writing course my sophomore year at the University of Buffalo. And about that time, the mid to late 80s, that's when guys like Bret Easton Ellis were getting published, and all those guys under 30 were getting their first novels coming out. And I thought, well, I'd be like them. Have my first novel by the time I'm 30. And then 30 came, and then 40 came, and then 50 came. So it took me 30 years to get my first book published, a short story collection called Muscle Cars. And it wasn't not for trying. I had two or three failed novels in the drawer, a couple failed short story collections, but I just wasn't writing well enough to be published, to be quite frank. I needed time to really develop my craft. And luckily, since 2015, when Muscle Cars came out, two novels have came out. The historical novels Rook, historical novel Yesteryear, and then next May, another historical novel called After Pearl will be published in May. So it took me a while, but I'm catching up.
Yeah, definitely. So, can you tell our listeners a little bit about like your last book? It was Rook, right? And you said
Yeah, that
After
was my
Pearl is coming out in March.
Rook. It's funny. I can remember exactly where I was when I got the idea to write that novel. It was a Sunday morning. I was standing in my kitchen, flipping through the newspaper, and there was an article in the local section, and the title of the article was something like "Buffalo Bank Robber Turned Writer," and I said, what? I think they already had me hooked just on the title. And
Yeah.
it was the true story of a man named Al Nussbaum. Al grew up here in Buffalo, New York in the 50s, married his high school sweetheart, started a couple businesses, and in the early 60s he would tell his wife he was going out of town for work, but Al's real work was robbing banks.
Yeah.
And he robbed about six of them before the FBI or his wife knew what he was up to. And this is based on a true story. So I was immediately hooked on this character, and I started writing, did a lot of research, and then I started writing. Rook came out in 2022, and I tell people it's as much about a bank robber on the run as it is about a failed marriage, because his wife was left behind to deal with all the scandal and being ostracized, and the harassment by the FBI agents, harassment by people in the neighborhood. So the chapters alternate between Al's experiences on the road and Lolly, his wife, having to deal with the wreckage of their marriage back here in Buffalo. So it was a really interesting. Al was a real interesting person to research and to write about, because he wasn't just a thug. I mean, he planned these robberies meticulously. He viewed them as a chess match between him and the authorities, and he would often describe robbing banks as chess with cash prizes, which I thought was a great quote.
Yeah, it is. So I'm sure like in your research that you did of him, there was just probably tons of more stories that you didn't include. Is there anything that you found in your research that just really stood out to you that maybe you could share?
Yeah, and it happened quite by accident, and unfortunately, after the book was published. In my novel, Al's daughter is just an infant. And after the book came out, a local news station here interviewed me, the NBC affiliate, and they tracked down Al's daughter, who wasn't living too far away in Syracuse, New York, just a couple hours from here. And she was part of the interview, and I didn't realize that until I saw the final, recorded interview, and there she was. And she reached out to me after that, and we met. We became friends. And the first time I met, we were in Syracuse, and she said, that opening scene where they're robbing the bank in Brooklyn. And I go, yeah. And you go, man, you got something wrong. And I go, oh man, what I get? She goes, well, you had them robbing the bank and putting the money in an army duffel bag. And I said, yeah, I knew your dad was in the army, and I just, kind of figured. And she goes, no, Dad preferred American Touristers. That was his luggage of choice for putting stolen money in.
How about that?
And she told another story about one day, her mom told her dad came home from one of his business trips, and he was all upset because he had grabbed the wrong American Tourister suitcase. And her mom couldn't figure out why he was so upset. She goes, we're gone a couple of days. It's a couple pair of pants. And, there was probably about 30 grand in the American Tourister. Yeah. So there was a lot of those anecdotes if I wish I had, met up with Allison before that. And, but it
I
just
wonder
didn't
what
work out
happened
that
to
way.
the other suitcase.
Well, she told me another story, that no spoilers, but Al was eventually arrested, and he did 14 years in federal prison. And when he got out, he became a writer while he was in prison. Ellery Queen, Alfred Hitchcock magazine, a penny a word guy, even Scholastic books. If anyone remembers Scholastic books from the 70s, he wrote those. And so when he made parole in 76, he was going to go out to California and start his career in Hollywood as a writer. But before he got to LA, he stopped in Vegas because he had buried an American Tourister in the desert, and that was his start over money.
Oh my goodness.
14 years had passed, and when he got to the spot, they had put like a strip mall over where he had buried the suitcase. So either some construction guy went home with a suitcase full of cash, or it's still sitting there under a bunch of concrete. But Al didn't get that money.
That's so funny. That is a great story. It really reminds me of Catch Me If You Can. His story. He goes from being such a crook to being so well known.
And by all accounts, he was a really likable guy, very personable, very well read, a good sense of humor, which I don't think I brought out as well as I could have in the book. But another funny story, after he was arrested and he was in Leavenworth serving the first part of his sentence, of course, everybody knew that he went to high school with here in Buffalo, that he was arrested and in prison, because it made all the headlines. He was one of the FBI's top of the FBI's most wanted list. Reader's Digest offered a $10,000 reward for his arrest. Everybody knew that Al was caught and sentenced to jail. So his friends from high school, they knew Al had a good sense of humor. They invited him to their high school reunion, which of course Al couldn't make because he's serving hard time. And I guess he wrote back a very funny and gracious letter apologizing for not being able to attend the reunion, but he's sure they understood the reasons why.
That's really funny. That's really funny.
Really interesting guy to write in research about.
And we really enjoyed your books. For
you.
anyone out there who likes this type of historical fiction, these are well worth the read. And we really did enjoy them. So along that line, because you talked about how long it took you to get into writing and everything. So what kind of advice would you have for like other writers who are wanting to start out?
Nothing they probably haven't heard before. Write every day. I think that's really important. I think you have to approach it as a job. This is my job. It may be a second non-paying job, but it's a job nonetheless. And so I think you need to get to work on time every day, preferably at the same time in the same place, although you can write anywhere. And you have to write every day. And you have to read every day, publish novels, publish authors, figure out why that sentence is great, figure out why it was emotionally impactful at the end of the chapter or the end of the book, decode it, and really approach it very workmanlike. And hopefully it won't take them 30 years. But write every day, and the biggest one is don't quit. Because you never know when that manuscript may come across the right editor's desk at the right time, and they give you a chance. And when that chance comes, you gotta be ready to take it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I remember there was like a kind of like a, oh, what's it called? Where you like, I went to a writer's retreat, and they did like this thing where you would take like a classic book and like a passage out of a classic book and write that paragraph in your own words, like develop it into your, like the same exact scene, but in your own words. It was very, very helpful. And I think
That's a great exercise.
yeah. And one of the things you said about reading and reading and reading, that's kind of what you're doing. You're trying to like see how that works and see why that impacted you, because I know there's like passages that I've highlighted in certain classic books that
Sure.
why did that stand out to me, and it really does help you on your journey. And
Yeah, and you're reading differently, right? You're not reading for
yes,
entertainment. You're not reading, although that it's going to creep in, right?
yes,
You're not reading for escape. You're really focusing on, why did this author get published? Why is this a
exactly.
bestseller? Why did this win the this award or that award? What makes it great? And that's what you shoot for. You want to be great. So that's again not groundbreaking, not anything new. But the biggest one is just don't quit. Keep plugging away.
Definitely, definitely. So you were talking about that your next book is coming out in March, right? You said March of next year.
Yeah, in between, I had another book came out after Rook. Came a book called Yesteryear, which is
Uh-huh.
also a historical novel. It's also based on another real life person here from Buffalo, New York, a man named Franz Stryker. And people may not know Fran's name, but they know his work because he was the man who created and wrote The Lone Ranger and The Green
Okay.
Hornet.
Oh, wow.
Tremendous, tremendous impact on 20th century pop culture. Not he's known in the broadcast world. There's certainly he's been written about. He's certainly in the National Broadcast Hall of Fame. He's certainly in the local Buffalo Broadcast Hall of Fame. But the common man, the common person, doesn't know his name like they might know a Stan Lee from the comic books, for instance.
Yeah.
And I think the reason they don't know Fran's name is because he sold the rights to the Lone Ranger for $10 before the Lone Ranger just
Oh,
exploded into this 90-year money-making
oh, that's
machine.
terrible.
Yeah, and Fran, he wasn't a dumb man. He wasn't a bad guy or a bad business person. It was during the Depression, early days of radio. He was supporting about a dozen family members who had
Wow.
lost everything during the stock market crash. They were either physically living with him under his roof, or he was supporting them financially, uncles, aunts, grandparents. Plus, he had his wife and two young children at the time. So he's under this tremendous financial pressure. And so Fran was sending out radio scripts that he had written and had been performed on local radio station here, WEBR in Buffalo. And he was selling them to other radio stations across the country to make an extra few bucks. He was selling them between $2 and $8 an episode. And his thinking was, if some radio station starved for content in Des Moines would buy episode number 1 of a series he wrote, they're going to buy episode number 2 and 3, and it become like a steady revenue stream. And that's how he came across paths with a man named George W. Trendle in WXYZ in Detroit. Trendle was buying radio scripts from Stryker, a couple of them a week. And after about a 6 or 8 month relationship, he said, "Hey, can you write like a Western?" And he sent him a telegram, put in all the hokum. And I love that word hokum, put
Yeah.
the masked rider, 6-gun shootouts, girl tied to railroad tracks, all the cliches, all the tropes. Can you do it? And Stryker said, Absolutely, because he had written a Western series a few years earlier called Covered Wagon Days. And so he took an episode and rewrote it, and some back and forth with Trendle, and created this Lone Ranger character. And it wasn't an overnight success. It was on the air for about 10 or 11 months out of Detroit. And Trendle knew of Stryker's financial predicament supporting all his family members. And so he also had a gut feeling that the Lone Ranger was something special and was going to take off. And so he offered him a deal Fran couldn't refuse. He offered him job security during the Depression, a salary, so no more sending things out, for $2 an episode, and guaranteed that he would have a job throughout the Depression to support his family.
Wow.
So Stryker never had a hit before, certainly not a national hit.
Yeah.
So he had to make a decision. But the catch was, you get all this, you get the job security, but you have to sell me the rights for the Lone Ranger for $10. That was the offer. So Fran was putting a rock in a hard place. Yeah. And so he wrote a Lone Ranger creed for his fan club, the kids' fan club for the Lone Ranger back in the early 1930s. And one of the tenets of the Lone Ranger creed was do what's best for the greatest number. And Fran said, okay, what's best for the greatest number, my family, is if I take this deal. And so he took the deal. He sold the rights to the Lone Ranger for $10. 20 years later, Trendle sold it for over $3 million, which was the largest deal in entertainment history at that time. Wow. And of course, Fran missed out on all that money, all the other revenue that was generated from toys and comic books and the novels that Stryker wrote. All that money went to Trendle. And when I learned all this, I said, I got to write about this guy. That's a novel there.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Wow. That sounds so intriguing. Very, very intriguing. And which leads us to, can you give us a little preview about After Pearl? Because we actually reviewed it, but so I know all about it, but go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about it.
I tell people that After Pearl is my pandemic novel, even though it has nothing to do with the pandemic. I started writing it right before we were locked down. And I had plenty of time to write. Yes. There's no place to go. You can only watch Netflix for so long. Right. And so I came up, and I wrote it for myself, to be honest with you. It was just to deal with COVID and the isolation. I wrote a piece, We Read to Escape. I wrote to escape. So I came up with this fictional alcoholic private investigator who's lost everything. He's lost his office. He lost his assistant, who he's secretly in love with. He can't find his car. He is now a hotel detective at the Hotel Lafayette, which in his mind is as far down as you can fall in the private eye ladder. And he wakes up on the floor of his hotel room and 2 bullets have been fired from his gun. He can't remember the last 5 days because he's been drinking, and the police want to talk to him about a missing lounge singer. Along the way, he inherits a one-eyed dog that's female, but he names her Jake. He stumbles across dirty politicians and American Nazis. And of course, there's a caper to solve and a crime to prevent. And it was a tremendous amount of fun to write, and it got me through COVID. So
you can tell
I'll be forever grateful. Even if that book was never published, I'm grateful I wrote it.
Yeah, and you can tell that in the way that it came across that you were having fun writing it.
Yeah, it was a blast. I try to write in the same spirit of the classic noir mysteries like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, kind of hard-boiled language, much different than the flowing and rich language that was in Yesteryear. And that was just great fun. I was like, can I really write that? Can I say that? And well, yeah, I can do that. So, giving myself that freedom to, step into a well-known type of genre and try to make it current and fresh and in my own voice was the writer's challenge that I set out for myself.
Well, I think you did it very successfully.
Thank you.
And can you please tell our listeners a little bit about where they can go, your website, or any other links that we might can post on the, we will definitely post them on the description whenever this goes live, but maybe you can tell the listeners as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to my website, which is www.sg, and then my last name. So it's SGEoannou.com. And there'll be links to all the books, my bios, upcoming events. And what I always tell people is the last page of the website is the most important one. That's the contact page. And I love to hear from people. I love to answer their questions. I love to go to book clubs, either in person or Zoom in.
Sure.
So yeah, please feel free to reach out. Once you had a chance to check out my work.
Okay, well, that sounds great. Well, we really do appreciate you being on the show. And whenever your next book comes out, we will definitely post it on the website and let everybody know that it's released. And we wish you much success on it. And thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And to all of our listeners out there, again, thank you for listening today. Please don't forget to click the subscribe button. This is Dee Marley, and we really appreciate you listening on the show today. Don't forget, keep making history and keep listening.